Hey everyone. In this short video, I'm going to talk about computer-administered interviews. And going back to our overview of the three eras of survey research that we talked about a bunch, um, one of the characteristics of kind of the third age of survey research, or the current age of survey research in kind of the time of big data, is that surveys are used to be either face to face or conducted by telephone, and now they're increasingly conducted by on the web via computers, right? And so as we're moving from human administered surveys where two people, an interviewer interacted with an interviewee, to kind of computer administered or self administered interviews, we have to kind of think about both potential challenges and potential opportunities, because these changes ultimately kind of requires certain, to some extent, requires changing how we think about surveys, and requires how we ultimately design and administer our surveys, right? So, of course, one of the problems or one of the challenges related to these self-administered or computer-administered interviews is the fact that if you have an interaction by telephone or face-to-face, usually respondents would be more attentive to the interview, less likely to kind of just stop the interview if they're not interested, because they're in an actual conversation or interaction by phone. Of course, when you have computer administered interviews, if people get bored, they might just log off or do something else, or not pay attention to the interview at all. So that's of course a challenge, and we have to kind of think about how to design surveys to make them to make people pay attention, or design them in a way where we can at least recognize if people pay attention or if they don't. But the other aspect, or that, as a potential challenge for computer administered interviews, there is also a lot of potential for kind of new methods and things that we couldn't do with these traditional surveys that were based on human or that were human administered surveys. Okay, so this video is about one example of kind of leveraging the potential of web-based or computer-administered surveys, and specifically what we're going to talk about is the kind of the trade-off between closed-ended and open-ended survey questions, right? So most survey questions in like face-to-face and telephone-based surveys are closed-ended questions. So ultimately that means we're providing a list of potential, we're asking the respondent a question and providing a list of potential responses, and the respondent has to pick one of the available options, right? So obviously that can be constraining if the researchers don't provide a full list of options, and in fact there have been a lot of papers and studies that kind of show potential biases based on including or excluding certain options and things like that, right? So the alternative, of course, is to use an open-ended response. So to provide respondents with the opportunity to, just give whatever response to a question that comes to their mind, not necessarily picking one of the available categories, right? But of course, this is difficult. Difficult to analyze, and provides its own kind of challenges, right? But actually, web-based surveys kind of allow researchers to kind of combine the strengths of both closed-ended, kind of the ease to analyze these closed-ended questions, but also providing the additional flexibility by allowing respondents to provide additional kind of response options, right? And so this is one example that is discussed in a bit by big book, because ultimately it's a platform that the author Sarganic provided, right? So the basic idea is that if we look at the if we look at the internet, or platforms online, then good kind of web-based systems. For example, if we think about Wikipedia, they use what is sometimes called like the fat head and the long tail of users. And what we mean by that is, if we look at the information, for example, on Wikipedia, we kind of look at the contributors on that website. There are lots and lots of contributors, but it turns out that only a few contributors actually contribute a lot, right? They're very, very, very active, right? And so good web-based systems like Wikipedia make use of both parts of that distribution. Both, on the one hand, they make use of people who provide a lot of information. They spend a lot of time revising articles on Wikipedia, for example. So that's kind of one part, is this in-depth, people actually investing a lot of time in revising articles and things like that. But then at the same time, there's this long tail of a large number of users who kind of contribute, but they only provide little details, maybe to an article and things like that, right? So the idea is, with websites or platforms like Wikipedia, where we're kind of leveraging collaboration across a large set of users, we're ultimately leveraging both kind of the very active users that provide a lot of information, but at the same time we have the kind of the wisdom of the masses, that there is a large user base, right? And so kind of the problem with traditional surveys is that they, and specifically with closed-ended surveys, is that they don't leverage either of that, right? So ultimately they don't use traditional surveys don't use the fat hat or the long tail, right? So people who want to provide more information or want to elaborate more in, for example, closed-ended surveys, they don't have the opportunity to actually give any additional information. And also, by virtue of telephone surveys and things like that, the samples are usually relatively limited because of the cost related to collecting the data, right? So in some sense, kind of surveys, traditional surveys at least, kind of only provide information about a smaller set of respondents, and at the same time don't provide this in-depth information that, for example, we could gain through like open-ended responses and things like that. Okay. So what the author developed in this context was a online platform called Wiki Surveys, that kind of translating the idea of Wikipedia into kind of surveys, and adding this collaboration idea to surveys in order to kind of provide the opportunity to kind of go beyond these closed-ended survey questions, right? So this idea of both opening up these survey questions to provide more insights depending on people's inputs, and also providing a platform that easily provides larger samples is kind of the underlying idea. And the name was actually the name is actually not Wiki Surveys, but All Our Ideas. But ultimately, it's a platform that allows researchers to design surveys where respondents can actually kind of contribute and collaborate and provide additional response options and things like that, right? So this paper, Sarganic and Levy, 2015, Wiki Surveys, I'll post that on Canvas as well. and maybe you can check it out, and think about potential projects that kind of leverage that as well. But that's one interesting example of kind of recognizing the changes that come with computer administered and web-based surveys, and actually leveraging those and turning them into a strength and or using the potential for social science research. So maybe going forward, we can kind of take a closer look at the paper, and maybe we can kind of think about data collection there as well. All right, that's it about computer-administered surveys. In the next video, I'm going to talk about linking survey data to other data sources.